Welcome tonight to our Kiwanis Club meeting. We're grateful to have you all here. I'm Rayfield Millett. I'm the Spanish Fork Kiwanis Club president. We're grateful tonight to have as our guest speaker and presenter, John Mendenhall.
Well, thank you for inviting me. One of the things that I really enjoy doing is talking about water. It is one of the most important resources that we have, if not the most important resource that we have. How many of you guys like to go to St. George? Anybody been down the last year or two? Okay. Why do we like to go to St. George? Warm, things to do. You know, it's a great place to go, especially if you like baseball in the spring, things like that. What a cool place to go. I talk to a lot of people about water, and one of the reasons that I like to is because it affects all of us. And I'm going to ask you guys a question. When you go over the Rocky Ridge in Santaquin and head down towards Nephi, how many towns do you pass through by the time you get to St. George? 5, 6, 7 at the most? At the very most? Only a few that you pass through. There's some turnoffs that go here and there. Why do you think that there aren't as many towns between Santaquin and, let's say, Cedar City? Why do you think there's not very many towns between here and there? George?
We live in a desert.
We?
A lot of water.
Bingo. That's exactly it.
This beer doesn't exist anymore.
All it is just a slide for a little bit of mud by the time you get down there. You know, everywhere in the West especially, but throughout the world, the only place that there's a population is where there is an abundant, clean source of water. If you think about that, that's true even on the coast. You go down to Southern California or even up the California coast, the only place that there is development is where there's an abundant source of water. And so there have been as many fights in this world over water as there has been about anything else that there is. Because without water, we don't have a livelihood. And tonight, I was asked to talk a little bit about water and specifically about a couple of other things. I think probably the first thing I'll talk to you guys about a little bit is what our conditions are right now, which are pretty dire. We had just got out of a 4-year drought prior to last year. We had extremely low snowpack. We didn't have much rain to speak of during the year, and we began to lose a lot of water out of our reservoirs. Last year we were blessed with a ton of snow. At this time last year, we had more than 200% of average snowpack in our area. There are stations up in the mountains called snow-tell stations. They're managed by the NRCS, and they are there to measure how much water is in the snow. They're not concerned about depth, only water.
What's NRCS, sorry?
The Natural Resources Conservation NRCS Service. And they maintain those stations, and they do record other things, but the most important thing that they measure is water that's in the snow. The depth isn't so important. How much water is there? Last year at this time, we had more water in the snow than we had in 1983 when we had floods, and we had more water in the snow than we did in 1952 when we had the floods. And so last year at this time, we were worried about floods. I was working with Spanish Fork City and the county. What were we going to do with all that water? It was going to come down, we were going to have floods, we were going to go through the banks, would have property damage, you know, and stuff like that, and we were really, really concerned about that. So we began to make preparations, and Spanish Fork City specifically went through the river bottoms and did a pretty good job of cleaning all the brush out and everything, with the idea that we would have to get rid of most of that stuff in order to let that water down. Through an act of God, as far as I'm concerned, we had a very strange spring that brought that water down in a slow manner And we had high water last year, but nothing close to a flood whatsoever. The really good thing about that for all the state of Utah is it filled the reservoirs. Now we come to this year. In the Spanish Fork area, we have several stations that we look at. All of those stations averaged, we are at about 35% of average. Payson Canyon is at about 45%. Strawberry Valley, where Strawberry Reservoir is, at about 38%. And when you consider that low of snowpack, it's almost impossible that we will reach average this year. Even if we had record snowfall between now and April 1st, we probably would not be able to get to average snowpack. So this year, our river flows and our stream flows are going to be low. We know that. We're going to be similar to what we were the 4 years prior to last year. And so we should make preparations. If you own farms, if you have anything like that, you kind of want to make sure that you're considering how much water will be available to you this coming year. I work for the State Engineer's Office. My official title is Spanish Fork Water Commissioner. I have the responsibility for the entire drainage area of the Spanish Fork River, which is about 644 square miles. It goes from Strawberry Reservoir to Soldier Summit on the east, down to Indianola on the south, and all the way down to the lake down here. And I am responsible for the distribution and accounting of that water. And I make a report every year to the state engineer letting him know how much water was used and what company and all of that stuff. It's been an interesting job. I've been at it 28 years. This is my 29th. And it's never a dull moment. It seems like we're either in times of drought or we're in times of floods. But I think there's certain people in this world that's what they make their living on, is one disaster after another. If it's not a fire, it's a flood. If it's not a flood, it's a drought. It's something that is always going on. But in this particular case, the water that we use in this state has a lot of people clamoring for the same drop of water. And as our population increases, Mayor Steve Leifson let me know the other day that we are now up to 41,000 people in Spanish Fork. When I was in high school, 8,000 people. And now we're up to 41,000. All of those people are living in houses and they're drinking water. They like to recreate. They like to fish. They like to tube in the rivers. They like to get their kayaks and go up and down the rivers. All of those uses are legitimate uses for the waters of the state of Utah. And we are no different than any place else in the state. The big difference for us is that we only have one reservoir that helps us with that, and that's the Strawberry Reservoir. The Strawberry Project was constructed beginning in 1906. There are a group of farmers from Spanish Fork here who, I don't know how they did it. Think about it. In 1906, we didn't have airplanes. They had no way to fly over the mountain. They didn't have a drone that they could send up there and say, you know, if we have a little water over here, we can drill a hole through the mountain and bring it over here. And then for that matter, when they looked at Strawberry Valley, there was no reservoir there. There wasn't even a lake. It was just a stream that meandered through the valley. But there were guys who ran their cattle up there from Spanish Fork. They'd been up there and they saw all this water in the spring. When all that snow would melt, they'd see these raging little streams going everywhere. And they said, what if we build a dam up here, drilled a tunnel through the mountain, and brought it down Diamond Fork? And people said, that is a great idea. Who's going to pay for it? And there was nobody to pay for it. The Bureau of Reclamation was formed at about the same time as the Strawberry Valley Project was dreamed up. And so the federal government sent some guys out here and they started to do they started doing a lot of surveying and a lot of studying. And they said, you know what, this is a pretty good idea. Because at that time, all of the water of the Spanish Fork River, Hobble Creek and Petite Neat Creek, all of it was being used for farming. And the cities here were extremely small and they were poor. We didn't have a lot to offer down here. We looked a lot like Parowan maybe, you know, Holden, you know, the little places that we pass on the way to St. George. That's the way this end of the valley looked. Because we could only use water until about the middle of June, and then it was gone. And then you fought over whatever there was left. And so the idea of this water coming to the Wasatch Front from the Duchesne River, which empties into the Colorado River, was a new concept. So the Strawberry Valley Project was started. It was number 2 in the projects that were built by the Bureau of Reclamation. The first trans-basin diversion. That means that that water was going to be on the other side of the mountain, drilling the tunnel through, would introduce new water into here. Now, there was a big, big catch to this whole project, and that was that the federal government was going to help build it, but it was a loan. And they said, you got to pay it back. And the farmers went, geez, you know, this is a big, tall order. Now, they were farming basically on sagebrush flats. And the living wasn't all that good. And so they were quite concerned about that, but they got a long-term loan from the federal government to build this project. And so the very first thing that they did is they went up into Strawberry Valley and started construction on the dam and on that tunnel that went through the mountain. 4.5 miles of tunnel through solid rock. They went up there and they started with the old hand drills. Yeah, you ever seen a hand drill? You know, it was a long steel bar that on the end of it had kind of a star on the end of it. And you'd take that and you'd put it up, one guy would hold it up against the rock, and somebody else would take a double jack, usually a 16-pound or heavier, and just slam on it. And you'd quarter turn that and slam it again, and slam it again, slam it again, until you had enough holes that you could maybe knock that out or else put some powder in it and blow it. After 1 year, that only made a few hundred feet of progress. Fortunately, they'd already thought about this. While they were doing that, they went up the mouth of Spanish Fork Canyon, just up the canyon a few miles, and built a diversion dam and built a canal that came down to the mouth of Spanish Fork Canyon. How many of you guys know where Powerhouse Road is and the power plant? That was the first operating structure of the Strawberry Project. It had 2 purposes. The very first purpose was to provide power to the site where they were drilling that tunnel. That was their very first purpose. So they built a power line, they built the power plant, got the water to it, started generating power, and then they put that power line all the way up Diamond Fork, all the way up 6th Water, clear up to the tunnel site. They had a man camp up there that had about 160 people up there at any one time. They had a stagecoach that ran from a spur of the railroad that stopped at the Diamond Fork Canyon, and then you got on a stagecoach and rode up to the tunnel. They had a full-time doctor there. They had a little hospital. They had a commissary, the whole 9 yards there, at the west portal of that tunnel. And they thought, we could make double time on this baby if we go around on the other side of the mountain. So they went on the other side of the mountain and they started drilling towards each other. You think they had any lasers? Any satellites? Nothing. They had those old levels, man. They went out there with a transit. And somebody stood there and looked up the mountain and said, yeah, you know, you're good. They went up and they started drilling. Took them a couple of years to get through the mountain, even with the power drills and the powder and everything else. And you may see some of those pictures around. Some of them are down in the city offices of my grandparents and great-grandparents who got away to go up there and to help drill that tunnel. There's 2 good reasons for that. They wanted the water. The second one was it paid a little bit, and pay was awful scarce. When they got done with that tunnel, they were 4 inches off of dead center. 4 inches.
That's accurate.
Holy smoke. I don't know of anything that comes within 4 inches of anything, you know.
And these computers, we don't need.
Computers, we don't need no stinking computers. We can do it.
No GPS, just transit.
That's right. So they built that, and when they got done with that, now they've got power up there, but they don't, now what do we do with the power? Well, that was plan number 2. So what they did is they provided power to the rural areas where there wasn't any electricity yet. The federal government had a program where they would pay for the lines and the wires if somebody had run them. So Strawberry water users started running power lines and power poles and got power out to those farmers. The other thing is that the revenue from that little power plant helped pay off the project. While that was going on, while they were getting all that stuff done, they dug a canal all the way from the mouth of Spanish Fork Canyon, south past Salem, past Payson, past Spring Lake, around underneath Santaquin, and clear out to Genola. And they came with a line that comes around on the east side of West Mountain all the way to Lincoln Beach. And how'd they do that? On their D9 Cat with a horse and a Fresno. Think of all of the man hours that was put into that. Think of the vision that these men had. And by the 1920s, they were ready to deliver all that water. The original Strawberry Reservoir had a capacity of 325,000 acre feet of water. It would be 325,000 acres 1 foot deep, or something like that. You know, in this particular time, you know, the reservoir was about 100 feet deep in some places, so it filled it up. And they began to divert water. The cities were extremely happy to see this, and they supported this project 100%. Why? This was going to be a great opportunity for them to see businesses come in. That additional acreage that was going to be farmed, you got to have a tractor, you got to buy gas, you got to have implements, you got to have clothes for those people to wear and shoes. The banks started to pick up, and this end of the valley blossomed like a rose. There was a pipeline that was put underneath Spanish Fork River. There's a siphon to this day that goes under the river, back up on the other side, goes through Mapleton and over to Springville. So now we were providing water from North Springville all the way down to Genola. Pretty cool. About the time that they got done, they thought, wonder where we can get some more water. So in the 40s, there was another idea. They thought, we're getting all the water in Strawberry Valley. They went up and acquired those water rights. Some of them were Indian rights, and they had to make those up and buy them from the Indians, but they said, we can get more water here if we go north up towards the Uintas. So if we went up there and started to get a few of those streams and drilled holes through the mountain to get it to Strawberry Reservoir, we would have even more water. And so they started talking about the Central Utah Project. And in about 1947, right in there, they really started doing some studies on that and said, how are we going to do it? Where will we build these reservoirs? If we do this for the Wasatch Front, we better do something for out in Duchesne. So they said, well, we'll go out there and build the Jensen and Upalco units out there in Duchesne and get them some reservoirs. That's where starvation came from. And then they said, well, if we are going to get everybody to buy off on this, we better get a little water to Salt Lake. So Jordanelle Reservoir started to be talked about. And the whole system was codified in the 60s. And they said, this is how we want to build it. As it turns out, it didn't get built quite like they thought. If you remember what happened in the 70s, I'm a child of the 60s and 70s. Flower power and environmentalism came in, man. And all of a sudden, you couldn't move a rock without getting somebody's permission. And so in the 70s, some things were scaled back. There were a couple of reservoirs that were scheduled to be built in Diamond Fork. They're not built. The reason is that they were concerned about what that would do to the landscape and to the wildlife was up there. So now we have a pipeline. We go up into the Uintas, up into near Wolf Creek, and there's a reservoir up there called Upper Stillwater. And it has a tremendous river in the spring that comes out of there. We go ahead and catch all of that water, bring it through a tunnel, and it comes into Strawberry Reservoir. If any of you fish up there, there's a place called the Ladders. That water comes on down into Current Creek through that mountain, and it goes into Strawberry Reservoir. So in the 70s, they started to build a new dam at Strawberry called the Soldier Creek Dam. They built this new dam, and the old Strawberry Reservoir They didn't want to waste any water, so there was a dike across the south end of the reservoir to keep the water deep and in a really good state. And they tore that dike out, and eventually they enlarged Strawberry Reservoir. And Strawberry Reservoir now, remember, it had a 325,000 acre-foot capacity. That's about double what Deer Creek is originally. Now Strawberry has a capacity of 1,100,140 acre-feet. There's only one bad thing about that. They didn't know whether it'd fill, so they didn't build a spillway. There's no spillway in the Soldier Creek Dam. So they have to manage that. And the idea is that if it ever gets close to full capacity, they'll open up the gates and let a whole bunch of water go down Strawberry River and down into the Duchesne River. And they could bring some down this way, down through Diamond Fork if they have to. And they can let that water that would normally come from Upper Stillwater go down and into the Duchesne as well. It's a great project, guys. You hear about it, you're taxed on it. Take a look at your taxes. Second highest tax thing in your tax bill is the CUP project, and every piece of land is taxed for it. But there's great benefits to it. Even if you're not a farmer, even if you don't take any of that water, that project is what allows 41,000 people to live in Spanish Fork. When Dennis talked to me about coming and talking to you guys, he said, I got a good question for you. What the heck is this pipeline up near the mouth of the canyon that's going down into the river bottoms? How many have noticed that? The Nielsen's are going to get an up close and personal view of it in just a little while. The new CUP project came in, and one of the first things they did is they built that pipeline down through the canyon rather than having a reservoir. And that delivers water at the mouth of Diamond Fork into the river for the irrigators. Comes down the river in the normal way. The pipeline continues down Spanish Fork Canyon to the old Trojan Powder property. They build a huge tank up there that holds 5 acre-feet. It's not very much. They put water into that, and from there are 2 pipelines that go north. One that goes to Mapleton and Springville. It takes the place of the old canal. That old canal went through sandy soil, and they lost a lot of water. It was inefficient, and they had to clean it, and it was a pain in the butt. So now they have this nice new pipeline, and they can put water into all the ditches that they need to. The other pipeline was finished just a year and a half ago. It goes all the way through Springville, Provo, and goes through the Provo River bottoms and up into the Murdoch Canal, which goes north. So now we can get water into the Spanish Fork River, into Hobble Creek, into Utah Lake, and we can get it all the way up into Salt Lake. And those were all finished, and they are operational. Here we are, we get a little bit of water to the farmers down through the river, and that's leased water, and we're glad to have it, but we still don't see any beneficial use as the city and stuff yet. This pipeline that is being constructed now is teed off from the pipeline that goes north to Murdoch Canal. There's a little cement building over there, kind of by where that big substation is of Rocky Mountain Power. They hooked onto that there, and they drilled under the highway that goes to Mapleton, under the railroad, and then they dug all the way across between the 2 railroad tracks, went under the railroad track, and then they dug under Highway 6, and it was half closed for a while. They got under Highway 6, they have gone across Canyon Road, they've crossed Canyon Road, and they've gone down to the first road that turns right, going down into the river bottoms. Had you guys closed off for nearly a month. They have stopped right there with that particular part. The first phase, and it is, this single paper here shows where the single phase is. It goes from that pipeline over on the road to Springville and comes all the way over there. It will drop off into the river bottoms. When it hits the river bottoms road, it will follow the river bottoms road past all of those condominiums down to the pumping station on the golf course. And when it gets to Robert Redford's property, well, it's not Robert Redford's anymore, but to his ranch, the Double R Ranch, it turns and goes straight south to the river. there is a canal that's right there called the Mill Race Canal. They had to dig through the canal, under the river, and come up on the other side. That's the end of phase 1. They have already crossed the river. They started on that end, and they've come clear out to the road. So now they're going to work along the road back towards Canyon Road, and when they get to the bottom of that hill, then they will put those two sections together and complete it. They hope to have all of that done within the next 2.5 months. There's not a lot of stuff that they'll get in the way of down there. You know, there's not a lot of power lines or phone lines and stuff like that. So they're moving along pretty fast, and it looks like they will get that done. That first phase goes over on the south side of the river into what they call a big cement vault. And this pipeline comes up into it, and that pipeline is 5 feet in diameter. It is steel pipe, 1 inch thick. It's cement coated inside and out. They weld it together, and then they have to grout the inside and put cement around the outside. It will be under 275 pounds of pressure. That is a lot of water. The project is meant to go all the way to Genoa. So this is the first phase. The second phase, which was the other book, they hope to be able to bid it in April. And in April, they will go down Powerhouse Road and go to the BYU Dairy Farm, which is 8800 South. They'll stop there after that section, but they are continuing with the planning of everything to go right on through. They think that they can get this done in about 6 years. If they get it done in 6 years, that'll be an accomplishment, because there's a lot to do going through there.
Delivery.
Mm-hmm. The delivery in this vault that is on the south side of the river now, it's going to come up there, and it will have a branch off that they can drain that pipeline into the river, and another T that goes into Spanish Fork City's secondary irrigation line. Smart deal. It'll have 275 pounds of pressure. They have to reduce that pressure. That's way too much pressure for us to use anywhere. But they will hook into the Spanish Fork City line and put that water up into the reservoir so that it can be used at the same pressure it always has been. This water that's going into this pipeline at this time is being delivered to the cities. It will be delivered, it's untreated, so it can't be drank unless we put a water treatment plant in. That's not in the plans right now, but it certainly could be. But it will supply water to the cities from Spanish Fork south. Spanish Fork, Salem, Woodland Hills, Elk Ridge, Payson, Santaquin, and it stops just before it goes over into Genoa. Now, where this pipe is going to continue at its full diameter, 60 inch. Some question the need for that much water out that far, but it's probably a good idea to construct it and have it there if you need it. If you don't need it, they can do something different, you know, down the line. But there is the idea that if they can acquire enough water rights and stuff, they could push water on out to clear out, well, over to Juab County and out to Eureka. And a few years ago, there was some talk of a big company coming in and putting a big production plant out in Eureka. It didn't materialize and it didn't happen, but at some point in time, where are we going to put all of our kids and grandkids? So this whole project is one that is going to be a great benefit to everybody here, especially the cities. The cities are looking forward to this. As time goes forward, you know, we'll use some of the water that we're using on the farms to water the houses and to water ourselves. And this CUP water that's going to be introduced could be used for other things. What we have, we're not sure. But CUP is probably the only entity that can tackle a project like this, because they're the only ones that have that kind of money that can expend it.